So one of our great partners, Ken Klippenstein of the Intercept, has some bombshell new reporting. Let's go ahead and put this up on the screen here, guys. Pentagon developed contingency plan for war with Iran. In January, the U.S. and Israel conducted the largest joint military exercise in history. And obviously, Ken is here with me now. Great to see you, sir.
Good to be with you.
All right, so just tell us a little bit of what you found here.
Yeah, so this CON plan, which stands for Concept Plan, is basically a war plan that the military does to try to game out how a scenario would happen and how they would, fight a war with partner nations. And what's interesting about this is I think there's this, misconception that the military has plans for every single thing. But the reality, and I interviewed in the story, is I interviewed a advisor of the Joint Chiefs who himself was a military planner under the Marine Corps Special Operations Command. These CON plans in particular are very expensive to do because you have to get buy-in, not just from DoD, but from outside agencies like the State Department as well as the White House. So these tend to be pretty rare. The last time that there was an Iran CON plan reported was in 2002 in the run-up to the Iraq War. And so this is the first indication that they've had any kind of update to those plans. And the code name for it is Support Sentry. And basically what's interesting about it is that it takes place in the context of a huge shift regionally in terms of the U.S.'s relationship with Israel. So under the Trump administration, they passed what was called the Abrams Accords, which were sort of pitched as a peace accord. And to some extent it was that because it did normalize relations between the Arab Gulf states and Israel. But an unintended consequence of that is that it made it so that they can negotiate together as a bloc for what they want. And basically their common enemy in that region, now that they've normalized relations, is Iran. And so the concern on the part of people I interviewed in this story, and a lot of military planners too, is that we were going to get dragged into a conflict that Washington doesn't necessarily want because Israel is now able to coordinate with the Arab Gulf states to do these sort of things.
Give us a little bit more of the history on this, because I think this is important. Obviously, back under the Obama-Biden administration, they negotiated the Iranian nuclear deal. Israel was very unhappy. Netanyahu came, gave this sort of infamous speech in front of Congress. Then Trump comes in, he backs out of that deal. Biden campaigned on getting back into it. He has not actually done that. There was sort of a window of time at the beginning of his administration that was probably the most likely time for him to get in. And so now, I mean, what you're showing here and what seems to be the case from other activities as well is that we're sort of backing the Israeli view of a much more brazenly aggressive approach to Iran. Is that a fair characterization? And what else are we seeing in that regard?
Oh, totally. To give you an example, recently, this is just a couple of weeks ago, the U.S. ambassador to Israel made a statement publicly saying whatever Israel wants to do to handle the alleged nuclear threat in Iran, we have their back. And there were so many questions to the State Department press secretary about that. It was kind of interesting. They didn't walk it back. Now, they didn't say like, oh, we're totally on board with that, but they were like, we supported the Israelis and our partners in the region. So that's going to be a signal to a country like Israel, which recently, according to the New York Times, conducted a drone strike in Iran where they blew up I think it was a military production factory. And that's one of a bunch of covert operations that they've been doing, killed a nuclear scientist not long ago. And so when you have a green light like that, you have to imagine that the Israelis are going to take that a certain way. And so the question now is, how far are they going to go? We had, as you mentioned before, the biggest U.S. military exercise in history. And I think something that's important for the audience to understand is that war is not when the troops go into the country. That war is a continuum, and it's an entire there's a lot of logistics and planning. That was the point of my reporting this con plan, the concept plan, is to give people the idea that the planning is happening, that in addition to that, the military exercises are happening, and that has the effect, if you look at the Iranian government statement in response to that military exercise, the Iranians started having their own military exercise, and I think it was a lieutenant general in charge of, I think it was the army, he said military exercises are the war before war. And I thought that was a pretty good way to put it.
The war before war. Regarding those drone strikes, I mean, there were a couple things, the Israeli drone strikes on Iran, there were a couple things that I found noteworthy. Number one, it came right in the wake of those giant military exercises. Number two, typically when Israel has engaged in these type of attacks on Iran, and we'll put aside, in Ukraine, territorial sovereignty, et cetera, here we have a different view apparently. Usually we say, oh, we don't really know what happened. Here they came out and said it was Israel. I found that to be noteworthy because it was almost an endorsement of the actions that normally we try to keep ourselves a little more removed from.
Exactly, and that's the effect that this regional shift has had. Another point I make in the story is that historically, Israel has been put under the combatant command of European command. in the U.S. military, and that sort of seems not very intuitive. Like, why
Right.
would Israel being under European command instead of Central Command, which is the Middle East Command? President Trump, in his capacity as Commander-in-Chief, is able to change something like that, which he did with an order in the last few days of his administration. He moved Israel from European Command to Central Command. I started interviewing, former military officers, trying to get a sense of why that. What that change meant, because there's hardly any reporting on it. And it turns out there's good reason to have Israel under European command, because that makes it so that they're not fighting shoulder to shoulder with the Arab Gulf states, and it just keeps our combatant command separate from the full extent of what their interests are in that region, insulates us a little bit from having to respond to problems that might be in the Israelis' interest, but not necessarily ours. But now that they're on Central Command, along with the rest of them, that's completely changed the state of play in the region, and not only aligned the Arab Gulf states with Israel, but also puts us on the hook to respond to problems that happened with regard to Israel that we wouldn't have responded to when they were under European command.
And finally, there was news recently. This is from the UN agency, the IAEA, that uranium purity in Iran is just 7% off from bomb-making levels. What do you make of this news and the timing of the news?
I think it's eerily reminiscent of the run-up to Iraq. Again, I'm not talking 2002. I'm talking the Clinton administration, when the UN is putting out all these statements, hand-wringing about nuclear enrichment on the part of the Iraqi government, and then the effect that has is it stokes a lot of anxiety in the public. I want to be very clear. I don't want the Iranians to get nuclear weapons. That's going to trigger an arms race in the region. Saudi Arabia has made its own moves towards a nuclear program, so has the UAE. That would be very dangerous. I'm opposed to all of that. However, if you look at what our intelligence community's conclusions have been in the Nuclear Posture Review, which it seems no one read, they state very clearly that they have no evidence. This is as close as a quote as I can remember. They have no evidence that the Iranians actually want a nuclear weapon. Now you can say, why are they enriching? They want to get to the point where they're near to it if they feel they need to hurry up and get one. As a deterrent kind of thing. But that our best intelligence, the CIA director reiterated this in an interview just a couple days ago, also said we have no evidence that they're actually going to cross that line into full-on enrichment, as opposed to getting to the point where they could do it quickly.
And I said the last one was the last, but I think it's important to get this as well, because under the Obama administration, in my opinion, the Iranian nuclear deal was one of their greatest achievements. Trump was just opposed to whatever Obama did reflexively. He, backs out of it. And as I said before, Biden ran on, we're going to get back into this deal that we walked away from. How did that fall apart? And to the point now where I don't think there's any expectation from anyone that it's really possible or feasible for this deal to be rekindled.
I think that's a really important angle to all this, because Trump is in the past. We can wring our hands all we want about what he did or didn't do. The reality is that Biden didn't reverse those things. Biden as commander-in-chief could send Israel back to European command. Biden as commander-in-chief has all sorts of a suite of options in terms of changing the relationship. The best impression I get from folks in the defense community that I talk to is not so much that that he hates the Iran deal, but is that he just did not prioritize it to the extent that he needs to. More focused on domestic stuff, didn't care as much about foreign regional policy. When you do that, the policy gets farmed out to the autopilot of the military community, which is always going to be escalate, 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 which I think is what we're seeing in the region.
Yeah, I think that's right. And in the meantime, while they squandered time on the U.S. side,
totally,
there's now a more hardline leader in Iran. And of course, now you have the complicating factor of them allegedly providing support and drones to Russia, which again just creates a more adversarial relationship between us and Iran, makes it much more difficult to imagine getting back into any sort of deal. Really important reporting, guys. I really encourage you to read through the whole thing, because as Ken points out, listen, before a war actually happens, these are all of the sort of preparations that occur so that they can build the case, so they can build the preparedness, so they can then go and sell it to the American public. So Ken, thank you so much. Great reporting.
Thanks for having me.
Hey guys, ready or not, 2024 is fully upon us now, and Soccer and I have been brainstorming ways that we can really up our game for this critical election.
Yeah, we rely on our premium subs to expand our coverage, to add staff, to upgrade the studio. We just want to give you the best independent coverage of this election, which is possible. So if you can help us out, become a premium subscriber today, breakingpoints.com, or the link is down here in the description video. It really means the world to us, and if you like what we're all about, this is the best possible way to keep us 100% independent, working only for you.